Good afternoon. Thank you very much for either coming in or staying to listen to the changed agenda from some of the older publications. I apologise for the change. We've just been talking to the organisers about that. But thank you very much for staying to listen to me. My name's Myles from Experian Marketing Services, and I'm going to talk to you today about the thrilling subject of running requests for proposals, RFPs. I think this is quite an important thing because of the fact that you're all here today looking at different vendors and looking at technology. Clearly it's something that you're going to be quite interested in, and actually selecting the right vendor is quite an important part of that process. So we've got some 8 tips and hints on how to do that. I wanted to share that with you. I'm sharing it with you from my experience of both being a client. So I've been the side of the fence when I've actually been the client, and now clearly I'm the other side of the fence now as a supplier. So I've brought together the two different sort of aspects. And I'm going to spend probably about 25 minutes going through that. If you've got time for a couple of questions at the end, I'll cover that. Otherwise, I'll stay here, or I'll be over in stand C17 if you want to come over and talk to me then. So, managing an RFP does not make you feel like this. If any of you have ever done one, you might groan and think about it, because it is quite a difficult thing to do. There's lots of things that are involved in it. You do not run around with the great feelings of joy that you're going to run an RFP. However, if an RFP is run well, then the output for you is great because you will have made the right selection and brought the right supplier, partner on board. So doing that is really an important thing for your business. And unfortunately, most RFPs are not run very well. And there are lots of points along the process where it can go wrong. So what I'm going to run through with you are 8 tips. And the tips are, the first one is about planning your whole requirements and your plan. The second one is about managing your stakeholders, internal stakeholders. It's about getting a great team together. The third and fourth thing are quite commonly linked, and they're about getting your business requirements together, your business needs, and writing. So you as the person looking for the software, writing a really compelling requirements document for the vendors to look at. The next 2 areas I group together are about selecting the right and actually getting the right vendors on board, and then creating a partnership with them and evaluating that as you go along. And then finally, again, you can group them together. There's how do you evaluate and make a decision at the end. So they're the 8 steps that I'm going to run through. So if we start with planning, in marketing, we all talk about 4 Ps many years ago. Well, there's the 6 Ps here. And this is about having proper planning and preparation prevents poor performance. It applies here. So when you're doing an RFP, my advice here is to plan. Plan about why are you doing this in the first place? What was my business reason that I am now looking for a new supplier, a new piece of kit? Is it that my existing vendor isn't performing very well? Is it that you've had this technology for a while and you know the market's moved on? Or is it something new that you need to do? You've got your company's changed strategy, or it's a new area in digital. So to always start with that sort of area, think about why am I doing this? And then do basic planning things, talking about what is it that we're trying to achieve, create a vision, get a budget, get approval within the business, look at high-level timescales. How long is this going to take? And who are the key people that need to be involved to make the decision? Who's the budget holder, and who will make that ultimate decision? So it's really important to actually plan in advance. I know it might sound a bit tedious, but if you put that investment at the beginning, it will make your RFP a lot better. So always start with your planning. The next step in this planning thing is you must get the right internal team together. Now that's quite important. I'm sure all of you have got certain people in your organisation that you would rather not deal with and bring on board because they might ask awkward questions or you don't get on with them. But really, you do need to bring them on board. If they are going to be touched by this RFP, get them on board as soon as you can. So start to define what sort of team you need. And now you've got to get a balance right here. You need to get enough of the right people involved, but don't overdo it because it'll get too onerous and it'll cost your business too much. But as part of your planning process, look at who will be touched by this RFP, who needs to be involved in this process, and work out what their role and responsibility is within your team. Communicate that with them and make sure they all understood what bit they're going to do, because they're going to have to commit time and resource to actually help you run the RFP if you're the one that's managing this whole process. So it's really important that you get the right team together. And for anybody who works in IT in the room, please don't get offended by this, but please, my bit of advice is don't let IT lead your RFP. Right now, that's not to say don't have them on the team. In fact, you must have them on the team if it's about technology. But the trouble is, they do not understand what you're trying to do as a business. And one of my big messages that I'm going to come on to is you need to drive your RFP by business needs at this stage. Not the technical solution, not your functional spec, but what you as a business are trying to do and trying to achieve. That's what you need to focus on when you're sending out your RFP to the different vendors. So the techie guys would probably not understand the business and go down a route that's a little bit too technical and ticking boxes and yes, no, can it do this? But get them on board and get them a clear role and make sure that they can support you, because you have to make sure that whatever technology you're going for fits in with your IT strategy. And my second apology might go to anybody in the room here who's from procurement. Some of my sales colleagues actually shudder at dealing with the procurement guys. So when you're a supplier, they are an absolute key part of your team. They'll make sure you get the right commercial deal, the right legal stuff that contractually covered. So they're absolutely key people to have on your team. But please, don't let them lead it. They too don't understand what you are trying to do as a business. And I found this quote. It's a guy, Michael Newman, from he's a partner in an agency that looks at sport and entertainment. But I just thought one of his sayings was, you can have the same guy who buys the paper clips, making the decision on which sports marketing agency to have. Their focus is going to be on cost. I mean, that's what procurement are there for, rather than who is giving you the best solution. What you need to do is find the right people to give you the right solution and get the procurement guys to nail the deal for you. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that as a supplier, but as somebody, if you're looking for that, that's what you need to do. So you've got your plan and you've got your team together. The next thing to do, so tip number 3, is to gather your business needs. So what I'm trying to say there is start back at what you really want to do as a business. And to do that, I will get your stakeholder group together. So the key people who are going to be touched by whatever it is that you're changing, run through a set of requirements about what it would be like to have this new capability in place. And it's quite important that you understand and gather those together, because that will form the crux of your RFP document. Focus on needs. Don't focus on technical solutions. You can do that at a later stage. Depends on what type of RFP you're doing, but I would really try and focus and prioritise it on your requirements. By talking about business needs as well, as a vendor now, it helps us, because what we do is we try to really understand what our client is actually looking for as a business, not as a technical solution. We come on to that later on. What we're trying to do here is understand what they're really trying to achieve. If you don't share that with us, we don't know. And we start to guess, which isn't good. So really try and help us to give us that thing, and keep it as open as you can to try and encourage your vendors to try and now start asking questions of you. The other part of this, in terms of talking to vendors about your tips, is you then, once you've agreed what they are, you need to then explain them in terms that a vendor's going to understand. So think about what success would look like, and then articulate it in a way that you think somebody outside your business is going to understand. So try and keep it as open as you can. I'd also encourage you, when you're putting your needs there, to encourage the vendors to come back and ask you questions. I'm going to come on to questions a bit later on about how letting vendors ask questions. But I would make it so that they are interested, that it's a really compelling document, and they want to come back and ask you more questions so that we can give you the right proposal and solution to go in there. So once you've got your business requirements together, the big task for you guys then, if you're the ones running the RFP, is to create a compelling requirements document. And this guy's supposed to look interested at this document he's reading, by the way. Whether he is or not, I'm not entirely sure. But as a vendor, it's so much greater when we get one when we're thinking, oh yeah, I can really understand what they're trying to do, because we want them to get excited. You should be looking for vendors to get excited. Don't see it as a big list that you're trying to test us or put us off or whatever. Open it up and make it a really compelling document for us to start looking at the requirements and take it forward from there. Many vendors we found don't do this very well. They write quite complicated documents, lots of check boxes, and they expect us to fill them in very quickly. And what happens is some vendors now will critically look at an RFP document, and if it's not written very well, and they think they're going to invest a lot of time and the chances of success are slim, then they're not going to respond to you. So you need to make sure you've got a document that gets the right vendors to reply. Don't just assume that the vendor is definitely going to respond to you. If your document's not clear or not good, then some vendors now are thinking, because as a vendor, this costs us money to reply. You know, it's quite an investment for a vendor. It's part of our sales process to do it. So we have to focus our resources in the right place. So try and make sure that you get a really good, interesting document that talks to us about what your business challenges are. Sometimes it's good if you can actually give us real examples. So take us through some case studies or some user case studies that actually bring the document to life. The other thing to do is it's good to use industry jargon, because that will suss out whether the supplier understands your industry or not. But in the document, try and avoid using internal technical terms or acronyms, because we won't understand what they mean. So always try, maybe give it to somebody who's not as familiar with your business, and make sure that that you've written a document that people can understand and help you through with that. The other thing as well in the document is make sure it's very logical. There's a whole stuff at the beginning that you need to put in, which is quite standard, about contractual terms, that you're not going to pay the vendor any money for submitting their proposal. But once you've got past that, try and build a story and a structure that follows through in the document, that's easy for the vendor to follow. And it might sound really obvious, but make sure you number everything. And that because we've had ones that haven't been very well structured or numbered. And also think about how you want to use that in terms of your evaluation criteria and the response that will be coming back from the vendor. When you put your document together as well, always try to think about what you're asking the vendor to send back to you. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Some particular things: be careful about the use of checklists or Excel sheets. They do have a role, but be very careful when they're used. If I have seen RFP templates that are just very, very standard, and a one-size-fits-all is not recommended, because it's not going into your real deep business requirements and needs. You might have some sort of structure to follow, but just don't take out a standard template and think, oh, I just have to fill a few bits and pieces in. You won't get very good responses if you do that. If you are going to use Excel sheets and checklists, that's fine, but be very careful that you don't stick to just yes, no answers. Can you do this? Yes. Well, yes. How well do you do it? Show me how you do it. If you give questions like that, you're not allowing the vendor to explore, and it demonstrates you what they can do, especially if we have to reply back using an Excel spreadsheet. And don't make things too complicated. We did actually get this in one document. I know you'll have a tendency to want to share a lot of detail with us, but it's getting the balance right, because if you overcomplicate things with this or too much technical jargon, we won't understand it. We'll start asking you questions to try and simplify it, and you're more likely to get into a more detailed conversation. It doesn't help us if it's too complicated, and that's the challenge for you, to get that balance right. But equally, please, because we can get quite exasperated, don't make them vague either. Now, by that, I mean, we did have one once that said, we want to implement a CRM program. What does that mean? You know, How long's a piece of string? And when we went back to ask them that, I got an equally short reply. So then that makes you think that they don't understand what they're trying to do, which actually turned out to be the case. But if it's vague, we don't know. So we start guessing, making assumptions. So then you are going to get different vendors making different assumptions. So you are going to get a complete hodgepodge of responses back from different vendors. And worse than that, what we can do, because we don't understand exactly what you want, we will therefore expand and maybe tell you too much. Because we're thinking, well, we don't know that you don't mean it, you don't want to talk about this particular aspect. So we will tell you everything, and you are going to end up with a massive document that you won't be able to handle. Complicated documents from lots of different vendors who've interpreted your requirements very differently. So it's about getting the balance right. Tell them what you're after, but don't get it too complicated with technical details. And don't be vague. Help us. We want to work with you. We want to give you a good response. And the only way we can do that is with better information. The fifth tip is about your vendor list. Now, some of you might work in the public sector where you have to go through OJEC and very formal procedures. So it's slightly different for you guys if you are from the public sector, because you have to publish your requirements in your document and invite vendors to reply to that. In the private sector, we don't have quite as stringent requirements, and therefore it's up to you to start to look about which type of vendors you want to go to do. You might not know. You might come to places like this to do you some research. That's the main thing you should do. Look at market reports like Gartner and Forrester. Come to events like this, do your market research, look at websites, check out to see what people are doing in terms of white papers, who's in the news, what's their thinking. That can help you. Talk to people you know, or the friends or colleagues, ask them their advice. I'd do a lot of researching to get your vendor list in. And then once you do have a vendor list, depending on which sector you're in, you need to decide how you narrow that down. Now, obviously, as you go through the RFP process, that's what you're going to do, start with a bigger pool and narrow it down just to one supplier. And there's a thing called an RFI, which is a request for information, which you can use if you have a lot of vendors and you actually don't know enough. And you can use an RFI which talks and whittles them down maybe on financial information, case studies, vendors. You might want to go back and get reference sites. You can use that as an earlier stage to whittle down your vendor list before they get the RFP. And I would recommend that if you don't really know which vendors you want to go and you want to whittle out, because you will get some vendors who haven't got the scale, maybe haven't got the financial backing, that will not meet your financial requirements or your procurement requirements. So I'd recommend looking at that to get your vendor list down. Once you do have your vendor list and you've started going into this, although I want to talk about this when you're looking at evaluation, the key thing here is you're not just buying software or technology. You're buying people. Even if it's a small relationship because it's just a service contract, you are buying from people, but depending on what solution you are buying, you may want a service team, you might want people to actually outsource them to help you do some of the work. So when you're looking at things like this, try and think about what sort of things you want from the partnership with the vendor. And make that clear in your RFP as well. Are you expecting a small account team? Do you want support? Do you want advice? What do you need? Because this whole process is about getting the right technology and the right people together so that you're picking the right solution. So whenever you're getting them there, you've got to start thinking about how important is the people part of this whole process. Is it important that I really like them and get on with them? It doesn't matter because we'll hardly ever deal with them. Or am I going to be dealing with them really regularly? So the partnership is a really important thing. And the other thing about partnership is, think about this as the RFP goes on. You're going to be contacting these people quite regularly and talking to them. Use that and think about how are you getting on with them? Are they people that you like working with? Can you get on with them? Are they attentive to your needs? I'm going to cover this a little bit in the next couple of slides, but consider that as well when you're looking at your bid. Now, when you're looking at people, be very careful, because a lot of suppliers and agencies will send out their A team, their pitch team. They're good guys, they really are, But I tell you what, you won't get them on your account. You won't see them again. I've had that. So be really careful. When you're going through this process, ask to meet your account team. Get them to come along. You might even stipulate that they have to present. I've had that experience where a client has asked us, the account manager had to do quite a lot of the presenting because they wanted to make sure that they got on with them, they knew what they were talking about, and I would certainly recommend that to you guys. Be very careful about who they're sending along and which people are actually going to work on your account as you go along. The other thing, one of my colleagues was going to be here with me today, Greg, and he did laugh when I put this up because I don't work in sales, he does. Be very careful with the sales guys. Again, maybe I shouldn't be saying some of this. Some of them are a bit pushy and can be on the phone. Now, I know when I was client side, I didn't like that. And it would start to irritate me if they were too pushy, being a bit gushing, calling me all the time when I didn't want them to. And the thing you've got to be, I mean, it's maybe more for us to take that on board as a vendor, but for you guys, be careful that that doesn't taint your view of the rest of the proposal. So be very careful and look about how they're treating you. But not just about the pushy thing. Are they attentive? Do they call you back? Do they respond? Do they ask you questions? Are they interested in you? It's really important about the people aspect of this whole thing. And the other one, again, I've talked about this before, but I'll just quickly go through it again. Please be open to questions. I mean, when we get stuck, we want to ask you, not to trip you up or anything like that. We want to understand what you're trying to do to help to give the best response. So my advice, if you can, is be open about questions. Now, some RFPs might say, all questions by such and such a date, and they will be shared by all vendors. That's entirely up to you if you want to do that. But as a vendor, we get a bit nervous about that because we don't want to share any of our secrets, or we think we've seen a little nugget in there and we don't want to share that by asking a certain question. So you might be restricting how open some of your vendors are going to be in coming back to you with questions. But it might be a policy in your company to do that. But just be aware that if you do, the vendor might not ask you as many questions as they'd like to. So I'd open it and try and do as many face-to-face questions and encourage them and, talk to people. We've been working with some clients, and actually both of us have learned an awful lot through the process. So there can be positives to it as well. So I'm just moving on to the last two points now, and this is when you have sent out your excellently written document. You've been very specific about what you wanted in it. You've got everything out in the market, but the other thing you need to do before you go much further is to set out your evaluation criteria and timescales. How are you going to assess the vendor? What's important? Are you going to weight it? Are you going to prioritise it? And do that up front. Make sure you've got all those things set out, and then share it with the vendors as well. I would encourage you to do that because it helps us to understand what's important to you in that bid. So it's very important to get all that criteria set out. Also to explain to the vendor what the different stages are. There's the response. Some people have chemistry calls and meetings to see, and have chats and talk to people about stuff. Some people go to demos, presentations. It's fine, you choose whatever is required for you, but just let the vendor know and set the timetable out that way. And don't be scared to delay things. If you've got more questions and you want to do it, but just let the vendors know that that's what you're doing. At the end of the day, I wouldn't rush it to hit a deadline if the deadline isn't absolutely urgent. And I would delay it a couple of weeks, because if you make the wrong decision, you're going to have to live with that for years. So don't rush things, but just plan it out and think what is important to you in your evaluation criteria to help make your decision. So you've sent everything out, and believe you me, because I've seen this, as the people, the client, you will get a lot of responses, some that can hold out open doors and, goodness knows what, how many trees get used in some of these responses. And you are going to have to evaluate those. So one of the things to make sure when you are sending out your document to evaluate it and have it done, make sure that you stipulate how long it should be. You can limit the number of pages, stipulate format, font, whatever you want. But make sure that the client understands that. So when you then get it back, the first thing to go through is some really practical things. Did they send it in on time? Was it in the right format? Have they not exceeded the page numbers? So go through all the basic requirements that you've done. I mean, I've seen some vendors that have stuck to the page limit and then sent 15 appendices. Guess what? Client didn't read them. 50 pages. I don't want to read 15 appendices. So if there's something that was important in those appendices, it's been missed. So that's a problem for us, but for you guys, stick to the rules, or if you don't want to do that, that's entirely up to you, but I'm just giving you little tips because you are going to have to wade through a lot of documents. So when you first get them, go through and do basic housekeeping, check things through, have they done what you've said and followed it through. Then you get onto the slightly more detail part of actually looking at the content. Have they understood what you wanted? Are they meeting my business needs? Does everybody, all your stakeholders, are IT happy with it? Are procurement happy with their part of it? Are there gaps? Do you understand what the person said? Have they made it compelling for you? You've written a compelling request document. Have they given you back a compelling proposal? Have they used images? Have they brought it to life? If you've put user cases or case studies in for them to use, have they used them? Have they, or have they just taken standard template, standard document, and cut and paste it into yours? It happens. And I've even seen ones where we've said the client and not actually even bothered to change it to the name of the person who's on the vendor list. So on the client who's actually put the RFP in. So go through all of that, and it'll help you to sense check about how much effort they've put. Have they really, really tailored their capabilities to you, and evaluate it that way. And you'll have your checklist, and this is why it's important to have your evaluation criteria, and you will go through and make sure that they've covered everything off, including how have they presented, have they put the right proposals in about how they're going to work with you as a team going forward. So whatever you've asked for, go through and make sure all those things have been checked. And then there's the final decision making. Now, hopefully, if you followed all the tips and the process has gone quite well and the vendors have been pretty good, you'd like to think with all your criteria that you're going to have a clear winner, which would be absolutely fantastic. Doesn't often happen, I'm afraid. You might have a couple of vendors who are great, and then you've got to try and decide which one out of those two you want. But very often, what you find is you've got one who's good at one part and not so good at another part, and vice versa. And that's where you've got your dilemma. Where do you go? And I can't help you on that bit, but you have to go back to your criteria and say what is the most important. So if somebody's technology is better and another person's service team is better, what's the most important? How weak was the people who were good? How much weaker was their technology? So it is quite a difficult decision for you, and that's why I was trying to say about all those other tips about how important it is to get your requirements to help you make this decision. And just one final little thing, when you do make your decision, as a vendor, whether we win or not, it's really great to get feedback to help us, and it also helps your relationship going forward. And obviously the ultimate decision is going to come down to budget holders and people like that. So just quickly going to wrap up. So I've given you 8 tips. I hope by running through all 8 you can see how important for me it is about planning, getting your business requirements and what you're trying to achieve done at the beginning, making sure you get the right team on board, documenting everything, using case studies, and then having an efficient and structured process to deal with your vendors, to test them out, backwards and forwards, build a relationship, ask them questions, just keep asking, and if you have to get them to come back and present again and do another demo, ask them to do it, because then you'll have structured your process and come up, hopefully, with an effective decision. So that was it for me at the moment. I don't think we've got too much time. I think there's a couple of minutes, but I'll be back over at stands C17 if anybody does have any other questions. And I apologise again that the agenda wasn't quite what some of you were expecting, but I did hope that that has helped a little bit to share some of my experiences of running an RFP. And if any of you are about to do so, good luck. I hope we've given you a couple of little tips that you might be able to take on board. There is a paper that's going to be produced in the next couple of weeks that will back this up, and we're also doing this as a webinar on the 12th of March. So if you've got some colleagues that you'd maybe like to sit and listen to that'll be going on the 12th of March. So other than that, I'd just like to thank those who stayed and listened, and I hope you found it of interest, and thank you very much.